Recording. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. You are in the right place if you came to learn about exploring the 2018 diversity, equity, and inclusion trends. So we're going to get started right now. And if you just bear with me, I'm going to fire up the PowerPoint. And I'm thrilled. I'm really thrilled that so many of you all have showed up and you're ready to learn. So thank you for your time and thank you for your willingness to be open to hearing what I have to share. Okay, so today's goal, many of you all are here to share or to learn more about the promising diversity, equity, and inclusion trends for 2018. Throughout this webinar, I will be referring to diversity, equity, and inclusion as simply DEI. It's much easier to say. And so when you're on the webinar today, let's think about discerning which ones of these trends might be best for your organization, recognizing that every organization represented here on today's webinar is in a completely different place. So we're going to be exposed to 6 specific trends, DEI trends for 2018. I'm going to ask you to consider those trends that might be best for your organization. And then at the end of today's conversation, I'm going to ask you to identify one action that you can immediately take after this webinar. So that action might be something that isn't necessarily related to any one of these trends, but it is related to advancing diversity within your own organization. And here's what I want you to know. I'm going to teach you as much as I can over the next 60 minutes. And before concluding, I'm going to share just one opportunity as to how you can work with me after today's conversation. Okay, so with that being said, here's a little bit about who I am. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Rhodes Perry. I am a social entrepreneur. I'm an author. I'm a speaker, and I'm super passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, specifically trying to help people feel that they belong in the workplace. And I am super privileged to have started my own consulting business in 2015. And I love it. I absolutely love spending the best waking hours of my day working in alignment with my passions. And I get to specifically inspire business leaders to do the things that will help them build great organizations where their people get to feel a sense of belonging. And the best part of the work that I get to help, the best part of my work is that I get to help clients, including clients, big foundations like the Arcus Foundation, multinational corporations like Wells Fargo, Santa Clara County, government agencies that span across the United States. All of these different sectors, large and small alike, I get to help them build healthier, more productive organizations. And through my practice, I equip my clients with the strategies, support, and confidence necessary to help them transform their own organizations. The really cool thing here is that some of what I teach my clients around, especially personal actions that they can take to shift their mindsets, to shift their workplace cultures, are going to be shared with you on today's webinar. And I promise that I'm going to teach you as much as I possibly can today, and then I'm going to offer some great resources at the end of the webinar so that you can take this work a little bit further. Okay, so I share this image with you simply as a note of caution. I want you to consider the various trends presented today and also remind you again that your organization is at a completely different place than the next participant's organization. So it's natural to feel super overwhelmed when you learn about all of these different trends and what could be accomplished. So don't think that you have to take each and every one of these trends and try to adapt it into your organization tomorrow. After all, we're not here to boil the ocean. We're not here to be everything to everyone. So your particular challenge today is to take the content from today's webinar and simply determine what is that one thing that you want to put into action today. It could be things that are related to the content presented, or it could be things that are related to yourself. And the key takeaway, for what you're here to do today is to learn something about yourself and of course, some of the emerging trends in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space that can help your organization. So rather than getting overwhelmed by thinking about how the content presented on today's webinar can be adapted to your workplace, I'm going to challenge you to identify one of the following goals that you would like to reach by the end of the webinar. So the first can focus in on community. Are you looking to connect with fellow diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioners? Are you looking for more confidence? Do you need support because you feel like you're twisting in the wind? If that is you, then I want you to write that down right now. I want you to focus in on community is what you're seeking, and that is completely okay. And you're going to find it. You're going to find it here, and I'm going to point you in the right direction. So by the end of this learning opportunity, you're going to know where to go. The next is, are you looking for a mindset shift? Are you looking for something that you can believe that change is possible for your organization? And this might be particularly for those of us who've worked in an organization for maybe 10, 20, even 30 years, and moving that needle feels like it's a Herculean task of trying to push that boulder, like Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the hill, and seeing it roll back down, right? Like, this work does take time. It takes a lot of momentum to get started. So if you're looking for a mindset shift, that's also something that I will connect you with at the end of today's call to make sure that you are feeling supported and you have what you need to believe that change is possible. And then the last thing, and this is largely for those of us who are ready to roll up our sleeves and get to work. If you're looking for strategies, if you're looking for ideas, I have many of them here today. So there's a lot of content. You're going to find it here today. And if that's what you came for, that's definitely this webinar is largely informational, and you're going to have those strategies. I promise you. So keep in mind your personal goal as we move through today's content, and please take a moment to share your goal with yourself, with your colleagues, just to hold yourself accountable. Because we know when we share what our goals are with someone else, we're more likely to stay on task and to try to get them accomplished. So you can quickly write this down. Is it confidence? Is it mindset? Are you here to learn more strategies? And once you do that, it's going to give yourself a sense of what you're looking for today. And with that, let's jump into the content of why we're here. So we know that we need to do this work now more than ever. Our leadership is expecting us to get results. And the cool thing is, later on in the presentation, you're going to learn how we can hold leaders accountable as well, so that they're also working towards getting those results. So it's not just us who and our professions that are on the line. We're also just going to clarify, why these trends matter, how they can help us. And again, we're going to discern which ones might be best to help us move the needle forward this year and beyond. And we're gonna talk about those, how to get those results. And as we go through the next section of the webinar, let's consider which ones of the following trends might be the right ones for our organizations. So specifically, we're going to see two trends that are helping us reframe how we think about diversity in the workplace, and how we put some metrics in place so that we can see if our diversity efforts are helping us move forward. The second set of trends that we're going to talk about is the role of tech and how that helps us in our work. And then the third trend that we're seeing this year is some interesting ways that are helping us sustain this work over time. So let's jump into the first two trends that are helping us reframe how we think about this work. And the first trend is really cool. This is a trend in that we're seeing practitioners, we're seeing folks outside of the diversity space embracing a new idea, a more inclusive idea of what it means when we say diversity. And then the second piece of how we're reframing how we think about this work is looking at the metrics, the baselines, and the benchmarks that we can put into place to make sure that as we move forward with this work, as we make investments in it, we are able to communicate that business case. We're able to communicate to our leaders the return on investment. We're able to communicate to those who are skeptical about, does this work actually help us with our bottom line? Does it help us with productivity? Does it help us with customer loyalty? Obviously, the answers to all of those are yes, and we are able to think about this work in a new framework where we can measure it. And we can constantly communicate to leaders who might be skeptical about why this work matters and how it is moving the needle. Okay, so let's look at the first one in a little more detail. So this concept, this idea of embracing an inclusive diversity definition. Okay, so terminology, diversity, equity, and inclusion, belongingness, this terminology continues to evolve. The great thing here is that there are two drivers in particular that are changing the way that we think about diversity in general. Diversity of people, diversity of ideas, diversity of experiences. But in the term diversity itself, when we think about traditionally diversifying the workplace, this started in World War II. It started as more women entered the workforce. It started as more African American people had access to jobs, had access to well-paying jobs that led to careers. This is the concept that diversity for many decades and for many organizations still centering just around gender and racial equity. And that is critical, and that should always be. The cool thing is that this concept of diversity is now branching out, and we're seeing this in two key ways, at least in this year. So as demographics are changing, we are seeing how diversity is being more inclusive of people of different ages, of actually aging workers who are baby boomers and who are traditionalists, so the generation that is older than baby boomers, how that mix is working with younger workers. And this is a key trend, trying to equip HR professionals so that they can understand how to make that mix work. The other piece that we're seeing is a greater recognition of LGBT people in the workplace. With the advancement of LGBT rights, there is a greater recognition that every state is in a different place in terms of whether LGBT people are protected or not. And so many people are looking to the workplace to provide necessary protections so that LGBT people can be hired for their merit and not necessarily fired just because of who they are or who they love. So that is a really great way of this definition of diversity expanding. The other way that it is expanding is that practitioners are recognizing the essence that we are multidimensional beings, that we, in essence, are intersectional. We have different identities that compose us. So there are different identities that make up who I am as Rhodes Perry. So you can see me, I am someone who identifies as a white male. There is a lot of privilege within that identity. There are also aspects of my identities that disenfranchise me in ways. I am someone who is transgender. I'm a transgender man. I am someone who is bisexual. I have a different sexual orientation than that of being straight. And so when we recognize these complexities in all of us in the workplace, the power that we hold, the privileges that we hold, and also some of the challenges that we face because we are from underrepresented identities, that is something that we as practitioners are considering when we think about this broader, more inclusive definition of diversity. And we have Kimberly Crenshaw to thank for this term of intersectionality. It's been around in the academy for 3 decades. And what we're seeing now in 2018 and moving forward is that in the workplace, diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioners are now embracing this concept and thinking about interesting ways of connecting employee resource groups that have once been siloed around different identity groups, working together, pushing diversity councils to consider how to diversify leadership, how to make sure that services are meeting underrepresented communities that should be served and have long not been served. So this is a great development in what we're seeing for this year. The second piece, and as I've mentioned, is thinking about the return on investment and thinking about the framework of this work. If we are going to invest in diversity efforts from day one, let's think about how we're going to measure where we're at now and where we're going. And there's a couple of key ways that we can do that. For those larger organizations, and this is not going to necessarily apply to that business that has 5 people, but for the multinational corporation that has hundreds of thousands of employees, let's say 27 different sites, employee and customer satisfaction surveys are critical. So say 3 of your sites out of 27 have invested and piloted different diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. introducing customer and employee satisfaction surveys to those three different sites is going to be critical to compare to those control sites, those 24 sites that haven't yet invested in those efforts. And what we're finding and what we're seeing is that when these surveys are launched, it aligns with what the research says. So, for example, in those three sites where diversity efforts have been invested in, employee innovation increases, employee productivity increases, team morale increases, customer loyalty increases as compared to those control groups. And you can measure it and you can show it to leadership. And it's a way of just underscoring that return on investment that you're seeing as you start to bring more staff in to focus on this, as you bring in more expert consultation, as you consider different programs that are in alignment with your diversity efforts. It's working, and you need to measure it, and that's one way that you can do it. The second way that you can do it is through public relations. So for those organizations that have gone above and beyond, you can look at the earned media that you get where your company is featured for innovative ways that you are diversifying your workplace. There are a number of organizations, for example, that participate in the Human Rights Campaign. It's one of the largest LGBT human rights organizations in the country, in the United States, if not the world, and they produce the Corporate Equality Index. And this is a really big deal. There's a lot of companies that participate in it, and there's a lot of companies, because they participate in it and because they are going above and beyond with welcoming LGBT people, they're earning media. On the flip side of that is the negative media. The negative media is something that you also want to track. So the media that we're seeing coming out of the challenges that the tech industry is experiencing right now, just in the simple kind of like the kind of old school way of thinking about diversity, just along racial lines and on gender lines, there's a long way to go. And so some of that negative media is important to track, and it's also important to show to leadership. It could be the spark that lights future change. You've got to track that stuff. Another piece that you may want to track is lawsuits that are avoided. And what you can do with that is in those organizations where you've just started invested or reinvested in your diversity efforts, you can look at the past. Look at the past in terms of lawsuits filed along demographic discrimination lines, and compare that to that point when you started to reinvest in your diversity efforts and moving forward. And what the research will show, and what experience has shown for some organizations that are doing this and tracking this, is that the number of lawsuits goes down. And as a general rule of thumb, for those big corporations that have the resources to do that, for every $250,000 invested in diversity efforts, I know that sounds like a lot for some of the smaller organizations, $2 million is saved in lawsuits, in settlements, in litigation, and all of that stuff. It's saved because you've invested, you've been proactive. And you can look at that ratio for some smaller organizations, and you can still make that case to your leadership. That's really important to track. So these are just some of the ways of looking at benchmarks. So now we're going to look at two trends as they relate to technology. And these trends are going to be really, really critical to look at. And they're not a panacea. So I want to say that technology is really helpful in addressing bias, unconscious bias. It is not going to be the silver bullet that takes care of all of your worries. We as leaders, we have to self-examine where our unconscious biases live, and we have to unpack that. We have to be aware of them, and we have to also be aware of our organization's unconscious biases, so that the structural pieces, so that we can say, we need to do better at hiring more women for leadership positions. We need to do better at hiring more people of color in leadership positions. We need to do better at hiring more LGBT folks who are aging, folks who are younger. Whatever the thing might be for your organization, you have to know where your organization's pain points are. And once you do, that's where technology can come into play to help you to meet those goals. So we're going to talk specifically about the role of artificial intelligence in that, and also the role of how technology can refresh the hiring practices of our organizations. So the first piece that I want to do is to show a video, and I'm not quite sure if the sound is going to go through. The good thing is that there are captions, and I'm gonna kind of talk over the video so you can see what's happening. So this video is going to be helpful just as a refresh to understand what unconscious biases are, and then we're going to talk about how unconscious biases can be addressed with the use of technology and our own self-awareness. So let's watch the video.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make? Go! The answer is 13.
Okay, so the first part of the video is how many passes does the team in white make? If you got 13, awesome. You're really great at following instructions. And you're going to find out something really interesting, that when you're focusing your brain on those instructions, on trying to answer that question, you may be surprised at what you miss because you're so focused on one aspect of what you've been asked to do.
Did you see the moonwalking bear? Go!
So it's certainly easy to miss something that you're not looking for. So if you're focused on your job, you're an engineer, you're doing awesome at creating artificial intelligence, designing the mathematical equations for algorithms so that the computers can make decisions. Awesome. Right? If we're not also challenged to think about how we show up at work, who we're including in meetings, who we're not including in meetings, some of the nonverbals that are taking place, these are the unconscious biases that are popping up. If work style, if the dominant work style in your organization is to celebrate those people who are extroverts, who love to speak out and share stories, and they get elevated in the workplace, there's some unconscious biases around, folks who are introverts or ambiverts and maybe have a lot to share and a lot of expertise and just aren't consulted in the same ways. These are unconscious biases. We have to be aware of them as leaders, and we have to be willing to acknowledge how they show up broadly in our organizations. We have to be ambitious in setting goals to address them so that everyone feels that they belong, and we have technology to help us stay on point to address those biases. So let's talk specifically about artificial intelligence and how artificial intelligence can help us in addressing our unconscious biases. So the first piece is just understanding what artificial intelligence is. Artificial intelligence helps us make complex decision making. So in HR in particular, there's a lot of decisions that are being made every day, and artificial intelligence can help us. Specifically, artificial intelligence can help us take our self-awareness of our biases, our own biases and our organization's biases, and help point out when they continue to pop up over time. So as an example, okay, so let's say that our organization has struggled with hiring practices that were biased against women, and leaders recognize that they could benefit from having more women in their executive pipeline. They understand that there's not enough women. They want to do more. Okay, so that is a strategic goal. We want to hire more women. We want to see more women on our leadership team. We want our candidates to be qualified, and we want to give more women opportunities, those who are qualified to join our team. Okay, that's a strategic goal. Artificial intelligence can help the organization examine past job postings in particular for gender biased language that may have dissuaded these amazing candidates who happen to be women from even applying from the beginning. So we can update our job postings using gender inclusive language or language that doesn't indicate kind of gender bias at all. And what we find and what we've seen in the research and what those kind of leading organizations are benefiting from is that it's increasing the number of women candidates for those positions where leaders want to see more women applying and actually getting the jobs. The unconscious bias can also be trained to alert us of artificial intelligence. My apologies, not unconscious bias. Artificial intelligence can also help alert managers of where their unconscious biases show up. So artificial intelligence can track the pattern of hiring decisions, right? So you're getting more women candidates coming in the pipeline. You can see how hiring decisions are being made by individual managers, and AI can alert them to say, hey, Rhodes, we're seeing that you tend to skew in hiring more male candidates, even though there are an equal amount of male and female candidates. And so we want to bring that to your attention. We want you to be aware of that. This kind of technology can also alert other people in HR. If there's one kind of gatekeeper who's making all these decisions, that this kind of pattern is existing. So if hidden biases against candidates who happen to be women are popping up, it's a touch point for artificial intelligence to point out and for the leadership team to discuss and determine if changes need to be made or if additional hiring managers need to be a part of that process, just to kind of address some of these structural challenges. So in kind of taking artificial intelligence and merging it with hiring, kind of the whole interview process and the hiring process, it can be used in other ways as well. So we're taking artificial intelligence and we're revising job postings. So remember, I was talking about gender bias language that could just dissuade women from even applying. And I would go even broader to say gender bias language would absolutely dissuade transgender applicants and non-binary applicants from considering job postings as well. What we know from the research is the research largely focuses on just kind of looking at men and women in the most binary kind of way and looking at language that dissuades women from applying from jobs. So women are less likely to apply to jobs when words like dominate, competitive, ninja skills, these kind of words typically dissuade women from even considering a job. So you can eliminate them from the posting when you know that. And you can use artificial intelligence to scan through the hundreds of job postings that you have to point that out. On the flip is that words like cooperate, collaborate, understand tend to dissuade men from applying to certain positions. So if you're looking to diversify positions and having experience and working in social work environments, if you're trying to diversify and getting more men to apply for nursing positions or social work positions, you may want to avoid using those words that would dissuade men from applying. Okay, so it goes both ways. And that's important, and you can program artificial intelligence to look out for that. The second way that you can utilize and leverage artificial intelligence is in reviewing just candidate resumes. So from the beginning, if you're looking to get more people of color into positions of leadership, you are definitely going to want to leverage this technology and simply reviewing the top lines of a resume, eliminating names, because we know that anglicized names that tend not to be ethnic sounding names, are prioritized and put at the top of the stack of calling people to come into interviews. So if you can eliminate the names of people and also organization affiliations and just look solidly at skill sets and compare the job posting to those skill sets, if the top candidates that meet them are those candidates that get called in. If you eliminate names, you're more likely to see a mix of people of color, of people with different sounding names that aren't anglicized in that mix and in entering into the actual one-on-one interviews. Now, again, the technology is not the panacea to remove unconscious bias that pops up in those one-on-one interviews. That's where we have to do our own work. But it does create a pipeline of candidates to come into the workplace to be considered. And then you get to know someone's personality and really have that opportunity to have that face-to-face time. The last piece that artificial intelligence and just technology in general can help us out with is with our hiring goals. So if we've established hiring goals, we want to bring in more women for leadership positions, that the technology that we use can review the candidates that we've hired over the past 3 months since we set that goal, over the past 3 years since we set that goal, and really identify, are we moving the needle? Are we achieving what we set out to do? And if not, artificial intelligence and technology can remind us, no, we're not quite there. So let's revisit these strategic goals and maybe bring in expert consultation to help us get from this point to the desired point that we want to be. Okay, so the last batch of ways that these emerging trends are helping us is all focusing in on the secret of sustaining this work over time. So there's 2 really interesting ways that we can sustain this work over time. One of which is completely thinking about our talent pipelines in different ways so that we can continue to bring in high potential talent that is representative of all the communities that we're serving, and is helping diversify, whether we want more women candidates in leadership positions, whether we want more people of color, more LGBT people to be included at the highest levels of our organizations. It starts with our pipelines, both kind of entry level pipelines and the pipelines that feed our middle and upper management positions. And then the second piece is looking at how we hold our leaders, the highest leaders, the C-suite, accountable to what our diversity, equity, and inclusion ethos is. So let's first touch on the pipelines. So pipelines are really critical. They're really critical for booming industries short on talent. And many of these booming industries short on talent, tech, green energy, healthcare, these industries in particular have been really creative in developing entirely new pipelines of talent. And I'd like to start first with the tech industry. So tech today makes up 10% of the 5 million jobs here in the United States. And 40% of those jobs are jobs that can be performed without 4-year college degrees. So to fill these massive vacancies, tech giants have supported the development of coding boot camps. So these programs continue to be enormously successful, and the coding boot camps that we're seeing are being geared towards those identity groups that are underrepresented in tech. So we're seeing more tech boot camps and coding schools for people of color, for women broadly. We're seeing tech schools for lesbians who tech. We're seeing tech schools for trans tech enterprise, for transgender and non-binary people. It's incredible, and they're effective, and they're funneling an entirely new crop of workers to those jobs, to those vacancies that continue to grow and grow, because this industry is just at the beginning of really booming. The second booming industry that we see in the United States in particular is healthcare. And the healthcare industry has been really incredible at developing pipelines for middle skill workers. And these are pipelines not necessarily for middle skill workers that are coming from the outside and coming into healthcare. It's looking at middle skill pipelines for existing talent within those massive healthcare organizations and elevating them and developing a talent pipeline that takes talent internal and grooms them for positions that they can grow into, stretch positions. So they're doing this in a couple of interesting ways. And the Urban Institute did a recent report that looked at how these pipelines were developed. So these healthcare giants essentially are developing entry-level healthcare workers for advancement from within. They're investing in middle-skill job training for veteran employees that are already employed within these organizations. And they're also offering coaching support to help workers advance at all levels of the organization. So these are just some of the ways that they're developing these middle-skill pipelines for existing talent within. And they're smart. They're smart because they're not losing talent that is underutilized and being poached from competitors. And it's a great model for other industries, and I hope to see that trend continue. And then the last one is green energy. So in 2011, green energy companies, the leading green energy companies, which are booming, and I'm really excited about that in the age of climate change, they teamed up with the U.S. Department of Labor, so the federal government, and again, this was in 2011, to strengthen the green job talent pipelines by including opportunities for people with disabilities to increase employment and economic self-sufficiency. So it was a mutually symbiotic relationship where the DOL wanted to engage more people with disabilities. Green energy was open and receptive. They recognized that this is an underserved community of people that could benefit from obviously being served by green energy. So why not hire staff who are reflective of those communities? So they signed up, they were on board. The DOL subsidized professional training opportunities for people with disabilities. They formed strategic alliances with a number of nonprofit organizations serving people with disabilities, and they connected those communities of people with green energy companies that were actively recruiting for people with disabilities, and it was enormously successful. So that was another way of developing a talent pipeline for underserved people, and again, I hope that this is a model that is adapted for other industries. So the last trend that I want to touch on is talking about holding leadership accountable to their diversity commitment. So we as diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioners are often the ones who are held accountable. Often the success or failure of diversity efforts falls on our shoulders, and that's a heavy weight to carry. A number of executives, they want to see a high return on their investment for their diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, and some, and this is a small minority of C-suite executives, are now starting to hold themselves accountable. They're now starting to say that the buck stops with them. And these leaders have recognized that simply talking about the importance of diversity in the workplace, it's not enough to transform their organizations. And so many have embraced some of the following accountability standards. And I think I give these leaders a lot of credit because it's not easy, and because they are holding themselves accountable. And the first place that they're holding themselves accountable is using the variety of performance appraisal tools. They're now adding a section in those tools that examine how well they are diversifying the departments that they manage, and elevating talent from underrepresented groups into middle management and leadership positions. So they're being evaluated on these criteria. And through the performance appraisals, there's two ways that they're truly put on the line. The first way is tying their performance to their executive bonuses. And at Sodexo in particular, they are tying up to 25% of an executive's bonus, their annual bonus every year, to whether or not they have moved the needle towards achieving their diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic goals. That's huge. They're doing that, and Sodexo is not the only company that is doing this. And then on top of that, so not just executive bonuses, but those performance appraisals are also feeding into executive compensation, so salary in particular. An increasing number of company shareholders and investors want to see this, including Microsoft and Apple. And they're now aligning executive and even some staff compensation to the effectiveness of meeting the organization's diversity goals. So naturally, these approaches have led to more dramatic results in diversifying the ranks of middle and upper management and improving the retention of underrepresented staff in these elevated positions. So it is pretty incredible. It's extraordinary. And what I'm loving is in doing this 6-week blog series, which you can find at rhodesperry.com/blog, you'll find 6 blog posts that go into much, much greater detail how these trends are impacting a variety of different sectors and organizations in really positive ways. And I encourage you to take a look at that. Naturally, you're probably going to have a lot of questions. When you think about your goals, if you're thinking about looking for additional support, one of the most basic ways that I would encourage folks to kind of look at, if you're a large organization or even a tiny small organization, is that you may not be in the position to take on some of these trends right now. You may have different goals, but I can imagine that each one of your organizations has some presence, some web presence online that features your diversity, equity, and inclusion principles, your values, how it ties into your mission statement. And so I wanted to give you, if you'll allow me, just one way that you can work with me after this webinar so that we can make sure that you're communicating a very strong diversity commitment that links up to the actions and the successes that you've already achieved. So I want to talk a little bit briefly about the diversity, equity, inclusion web presence assessment that I'm now offering. So this is a service that I have provided to a variety of clients as a part of bigger projects. And I realize that not every person, not every organization can bring me on full freight to work with me for 6 months or a year. That's totally fine. This is an assessment. It's a fixed cost that I offer to anyone, and including any webinar participant here, to consider. And essentially, what it is that it is an examination that I do. It's a 360 scan of your web presence. I'll go through your social media presence, as well as looking at some of your email marketing and other communications that are done electronically, to make sure that you are incorporating what your diversity ethos is in those communications. And at its most basic level, I'm sure that your organization has an about section. It talks about what your mission is. If you haven't stitched in what your diversity ethos is there, obviously that's our first place to start. But this is a much deeper dive. And it allows you to make sure that you're communicating to both your staff, to potential talent, to your diverse contractors, as well as the communities that you're serving, how you're living your diversity ethos. And it's really basic. And even if you're just getting started on this work and you feel like, we don't have a lot of successes yet, there's still ways to communicate what you're doing. And this is a service that I'm offering. So you can find out more about it if you go to my website, rhodesperry.com/resources. You'll see that service included on that page, as well as learning about it here. And you can certainly email me as well. So there's a couple of things that I'd like to say. Is that first, that I'm accepting about a little less than a dozen more clients in doing this service this year. So I still have time available to work with you. And I'm offering a special discount up through April 30th. It's a 20% discount, and it is available to webinar participants who've been sitting through this presentation. And you can email me at rhodes@rhodesperry.com if you want to talk more about that service. So thank you for letting me just spend a little bit of time of talking about how you can work with me further. And even if you're not at that place where you are in the position to work with me on this particular service, I do want to let you know that if you were focused on just walking away from this webinar, having a greater sense of community, you can absolutely get that if you go to my website and you look at any of the social media channels. One of the best ways, I would say, get involved with the Facebook community, Rhodes Perry Consulting, and you'll see a lot of other diversity practitioners in that space. We engage about articles every day of what we're seeing, additional trends. It'll allow you to really keep your fingers on the pulse of what's happening. It's a free service. Another free service is just to subscribe to my Belonging at Work newsletter. It's a great way to stay connected with other practitioners in the field. I learn a lot from the communications that I get from people responding to that newsletter. Again, it's a free service. And then through the blog, it's another great way to stay connected. If you're looking for mindset shifts, if you feel like you are the diversity practitioner that's twisting in the wind and all of the successes and failures fall on your shoulders and not necessarily your leadership shoulders yet, then I offer an inclusion coaching service that, again, you can email me and we can talk a little bit more about what your needs are, if you're a good fit, and I can talk about some of the services that way. And then finally, if you want additional strategies, again, the blog is a great place to go. If you're looking at help at how to implement any of these strategies, that's where my consulting services can come in handy. So again, rhodes@rhodesperry.com. You can email me there. The last thing that I want to leave you with is asking you right now, with all of the learnings that you've walked away from this webinar, I'm asking you to think about one personal action that you can take away. So if it's subscribing to my newsletter, if it's reading the blog, Great. Those are great personal actions. If one of these trends that I shared with you is something that you think that your organization can double down on if you're already doing it, or try to adapt, go for it. I encourage you to write that down as an accountability piece. And again, if you need help along the way, that's where my consulting services can come in handy. So again, email me at rhodes@rhodesperry.com, and I'm happy to help you that way. So I hope that this content was helpful. I hope that if you are in the position where you do want to take a look at your web presence, to take advantage of that 20% discount on the fixed service fee that I offer. It's a great discount. It's a really good service, and I think it will communicate to external audiences what you've long been doing if you've been doing this work for a long time. And if you're just getting started, it's a great way to put forward your initial efforts. So with that, I want to thank you for spending your time with me. I want to thank you for being on this webinar. You will get a thank you note afterwards with this recording. I encourage you to share it with people who can benefit from what's been offered here. And if you're someone who is more into reading this content, again, go to rhodesperry.com/blog. You will see the 6-week series there. And I thank you for your time, and I hope to see you on future webinars. And if you have taken the time to sit here, I welcome feedback. I am always interested in encouraging learning about ways that I can continue to produce high value content. So, drop me an email or take the time to fill out the webinar feedback. And I appreciate you, and I appreciate all that you're doing to make your organizations where everyone feels that they belong. All right, take care, and I'll talk with you soon.